Mom's Playground. Hooray!
The Celebrity Jobber Podcast with Jeff Zito. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, give a 5-star rating, and leave a review. Check out all our past episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you pod. What if these celebrities weren't famous? What would they have become? What was their first job? We're about to find out.
So believe it or not, the show Shark Tank is in its 15th season. It's on ABC Friday nights. And of course, if you're like me and you like watching a lot of Shark Tank, it's on CNBC just about every night for like 3 and 4 hours at a clip. So I started watching it. I got hooked on it. At my parents' house, believe it or not. Our tastes don't usually line up so evenly, but I kind of fell in love with the show. And you got these 5 rich guys, and basically you come out there on the Shark Tank and you pitch an idea, and if your idea seems to be a good one for the sharks to invest in, they'll give you a bunch of money, but you got to know your numbers, you got to know your valuation, and if you don't know all that kind of stuff, they will quickly call you a dummy. And our next guest is the guy that will call you the dummy, but he's kind of lovable. He's not the evil kind of villain that I thought he was in the beginning. Every show like American Idol, you got your Simon Cowell, you've got your villain that people kind of fall in love with. Mr. Wonderful, Kevin O'Leary, kind of that guy. But as I've gotten to watch the show over the years, I have figured out that Kevin O'Leary is not a villain. He's actually a pretty nice guy. And if I was on the Shark Tank, I would definitely want to partner with Kevin O'Leary, not Mark Cuban. Yeah, I'm going Mr. Wonderful all the way. I don't know what it is. He's got some kind of je ne sais quoi. That's kind of a word that I believe he would use. He's fancy. He's pretty smart, and he happens to be our guest this week on Celebrity Jobber, the one and only Mr. Wonderful, Kevin O'Leary.
I'm here.
I am a grasshopper. I just want you to know. My wife is a bit of a crazy chicken, but I'm glad to speak with you today.
Thank you.
Big fan of Shark Tank, and I love that little vignette that comes on once in a while, and you get to see a little bit of a deeper side of you. So if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about growing up, because it seems like you were all over the place. You moved around a lot.
Yeah, my biological father died when I was 7 years old. And my mother remarried to a guy named George who was graduating from the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. So I grew up at Bottenfield High School, Greencroft Avenue. That's where I lived. And he got a job at the United Nations, and we started moving to new countries every 24 months. So first location was Cambodia, Tunisia, Ethiopia, Cyprus, France, Japan, Germany. So I thought everybody moved around like that. And obviously, that's not the case, but it gave me a huge education about all these cultures all around the world. And it made me a better international investor, because I'm not scared to put money to work in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, because I know German engineers built the buildings. I know the French colonized it, have fantastic cooking. I learned how to become a chef there. I mean, all of this stuff happened to me, and I didn't know any different. But it ended up being very important in terms of the way I think today.
I would imagine. And tell us a little bit about schooling. So you're moving around a lot. Was high school a little bit of a chore? Were you good in school? And then where'd you end up ultimately going to college?
Oh, so I went to college in Waterloo, which is a big engineering school, and then did an MBA at Ivy. But both Canadian locations. One's in Waterloo, Ontario, and the other's in London, Ontario. And then when I graduated, got married, and moved to Boston and grew up there, raised my family in Boston, one of my favorite towns. And then eventually, when Elizabeth Warren got in, I moved to Florida for tax reasons, and I live in Miami now.
Oh, excellent. Very good. So in school.
Yeah, no, I think Elizabeth's a fantastic politician, but I love to bash her policies. She has terrible policies, and she drives out wealth. She drives out entrepreneurs. I never invest in Massachusetts. I take all my companies out of there, and I move them to Texas or Florida.
Wow. So you're based out of Florida now, but tell me a little bit about what you went to school for. Did you always know that you wanted to be an entrepreneur, or were you looking to be something else? Weren't you wanting to be a rock star at one point?
I've always wanted to be a rock star, always. But, the problem with that is, and I keep trying, there's so many bands out there, and I play with lots of them. I've been I have a show I do in Nantucket on the 5th at the brewery.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, I just met the guys that own Gibson Guitar. It's funny you brought this up. And I've always wanted an SG, the classic SG, candy red. Well, they were really kind to me. They made a one-of-a-kind Mr. Wonderful Candy Red SG.
Wow.
Based on the original 60s version. And I'm going to rock it with that guitar on the stage at the brewery around 2 o'clock on the 5th. But I can't make a living. My father told me, you'll starve to death. You're just not good enough.
When did that click?
Right.
When did that click? How old were you when you were like, okay, I got to get my stuff together here?
18, I was starving to death. He was right. So I went back to school and said, okay, what am I good at? I think I can do business. Now, and I wanted to be a photographer and a cinematographer, and I wanted to do a bunch of stuff around arts. And he said, you're just not good enough. The competition is going to kill you. And that's very important to have a mentor like that, because he was right. And so what I did was, after all these years, I've been very fortunate, very lucky. And today I went back and I bought all this production equipment, every camera I ever wanted. I've got about 50 guitars just to show them you can do both.
And you're having fun doing it now.
I'm trying to no matter how hard you play, there's always a guy better. That's what I've learned about guitars, which just pisses me off so much. I can't tell you. So frustrating.
So, Mr. Wonderful, what do you consider your big break? And I'm not talking about Shark Tank fame. I'm talking about when you were an entrepreneur, maybe when you sold your company for billions. What do you consider maybe your big break in life, or maybe the events that led up to this big break?
I know when it was.
It
was when I got my first job, and I got a job as an ice cream scooper in an ice cream store. And when you go and you line up to try the different flavors, that you get a taster. It's like a little bit of ice cream on a wooden stick. But often what the kids would do is throw their gum on the floor. So on my first, and the only reason I wanted this job is the girl I was hot for in high school was working at the shoe store across the mall. So she could see me. And I figured when we got out at 6 o'clock, we could go out on a date or something. And the first day I'm there, the owner, a woman, says to me, look, you finished scooping. Now scrape all the gum off the tiles. The Mexican tiles, beautiful tiles on the floor, really big ones. Get down with a scraper. And I could see the girl looking at me, waiting for me to get out. And I was going to be on my knees scraping. And I said, excuse me, to the owner. I was hired as a scooper, not a scraper. And she said, no, you're hired to work for me, and whatever I want you to do, you're going to do. And I said, I'm not, because I was so worried about the bad branding of being on my knees, right? And so she fired me. She fired me on my very first day, and that changed my life forever. I realized there's two kinds of people in the world. There's people that own the store, and there's people that scrape the you-know-what off the floor.
Right.
And I got to be the owner. And that was the last day I ever worked for anybody in my life. I went back years later with a camera crew after, we had our first big exit in the learning company, that $4 billion you referenced. And I wanted to find her and thank her for changing my life forever. And they ripped down the mall. They tore it to pieces.
Oh, man.
I could have afforded to do that then, which is what I wanted to do. But somebody sent me one of the bricks from it as a reminder how you got started. I have it on my desk. I look at it every day. These are the moments that define entrepreneurs. They want to find their own freedom. And I tell that to everybody. It's not about the greed of money. It's about the pursuit of personal freedom. That's why you do it, so that you can decide when to scoop and when to scrape.
That's so cool, because, I talk to a lot of people. I ask, what their big break was. And, I talked to Henry Winkler, the Fonz, last week, and he said, well, my big break was when, I became Fonzie. It introduced me to the world. Your big break was scraping gum off the floor at an ice cream parlor, which basically set your mind saying, I'm not working for the man ever again. And that's just very interesting. And how old were you at that point in time?
I think I was 16 years old.
That's awesome, man.
Well, it was an important moment.
Yeah, I would say so. Life defining. And do you ever sit back and do you ever think about if all this didn't happen, if you didn't sell that company for $4 billion, you weren't on the Shark Tank, maybe you were just Kevin O'Leary, not Mr. Wonderful, Mr., substantial, Mr., subpar. What do you think you might be doing today? Do you think you would be in the arts? Do you think you'd be a photographer? You said your dad told you you're not going to make any money being a rock star or doing anything like that. Is there anything that interests you that you think if you weren't an investor, if you weren't an entrepreneur, maybe something else, another field that you might be in today?
Well, I'm half Lebanese and half Irish. The Irish are crazy, and the Lebanese are Phoenicians. They're salespeople, and so combining crazy with sales makes me a good marketer. I know I'm good at that, so I'd be doing something in that genre. However, years later, you brought up photography. I went out there and I started photographing wherever I traveled, and I got an invitation to do an exhibit at Art Miami. And that was pretty interesting because a lot of my work sold for charity. And it may have been the celebrity factor, but it was very cool to get people to say, I like that piece and I'm going to use it. I'm going to buy it.
Do you ever think the Shark Tank would end up being on for 15 seasons? I mean, this started off, it was pretty cool. Not a lot of shows make it past a couple of years. Yeah,
it's in the 1 percentile now. And I must tell you, for the first 3 years, this may be, legend. I'm not sure how true it is, but I believe it to be so. It was on the bubble, as they say on TV, for 3 years in a row. Got canceled 3 years in a row. ABC changed its CEO 3 years in a row. It started in 1980, and 3 years later, it was still on the bubble. And then Iger went home and told Willow Bay, his wife, who I knew from CNN in those days, that they were canceling Shark Tank. And she said, no, you're not. Our kids love that show. It's the only show our family watches together. Call them up and do one more season. It's right on the edge. She saved our asses. That's what happened. And we went on to season 4, and it went geometric. It exploded because of the recession. People wanted to become entrepreneurs. And I it's a debt of gratitude that we get to remember it that way. Now it's iconic. It's on in 42 countries. I learned last year when I was on a train from Geneva to Zurich that I'm the most hated man in Austria. It's an honor. It's an honor.
Well, Shark Tank on ABC, 15 seasons, streaming on Hulu. Such a pleasure talking to you, Mr. Wonderful. You'll see me on the show one day. Please, believe you me.
I look forward to it. I will eviscerate you. Believe me. Please come.
No, you're going to love me. Trust me. Okay, well, that was that. I really do think that me and Mr. Wonderful would get along great. And if you watch the show Shark Tank, there are these little vignettes where they kind of tell you a little bit about each shark. And I'm always moved by the Mr. Wonderful vignette because he gets emotional. He talks about his stepfather who pretty much raised him. His real father passed away when Mr. Wonderful was 7 years old. His stepfather raised him, and like he said, he was in the UN, so they kind of moved around a lot. They moved all over the place to all these different countries, and he kind of says because of that upbringing, which he thought all kids did, he thought everybody just moved around like he did, but because of that upbringing, it says he makes him better in business. He understands things in other countries and is able to close deals because of him moving around so much when he was younger. So I thought that was interesting. But the most interesting thing of them all was the combination big break and first job. His first job was working at an ice cream store in the mall. And the reason that he worked at the place to begin with was because he was hot for some girl that was working at the shoe store across from the ice cream store. But what he said his big break was when he worked at the ice cream store and the owner made him scrape gum off of the floor with a little ice cream scooper. He thought that was quote unquote bad branding. He didn't want that hot little number over at the shoe store to see him on his hands and knees scraping gum off the floor. He thought that was bad for his image. He said, no, man, I'm not doing that. And they fired him right then there on the spot. And he knew at that moment in time, 16 years old. That was his big break. He says that was his big break. It wasn't like selling his company for $4 billion. It wasn't, getting on the Shark Tank. It was when he was 16 years old and he got fired from that job because he was not willing to get on his hands and knees and scrape gum off the floor and work for the man. That's when he said, I am going to be an entrepreneur. There are people that scrape gum off of a tile, and there are people that own the place. And that's when it all connected for Mr. Wonderful. Please remember, if you like this podcast, give us a 5-star rating and leave a review. That is most appreciated. On Instagram at Celebrity Jobber Podcast and online at celebrityjobber.com if you want to stream any of our past episodes. As always, thanks for listening to the Celebrity Jobber Podcast. I'm Jeff Zito. We'll see you next week.